Children of I want to talk to your manager parents, what has been your most embarrassing experience? Story 1. My grandfather once bought a sausage roll at a football game during halftime. When he returned to his seat, he discovered that the pastry was severely overcooked and the dough was burnt. He was beside himself with rage. He didn't return it right away as the second half of the game began, but he spent most of the second half angry and complaining about his bad purchase. He took the sausage home, called the customer service number on the package. I'm guessing he didn't choose the most polite words to talk to, but I didn't hear it, and put the rest of the sausage in the freezer for a couple of weeks. Fast forward to the day of the next match. Grandpa tells me we're leaving early so he can replace the sausage. Customer service told him to go to kiosk number 3 at the entrance next to the ticket counter. When we arrived, it turned out that the kiosk was closed. Grandfather began to look around, angry and blushing, and headed to window number 3 of the ticket office, loudly slapping the frozen sausage as if challenging. I tried to convince him that the ticket office had nothing to do with the food sales point, but grandfather did not want to listen. The woman outside the ticket window tried to explain the same thing to him, that they were selling tickets to the match, not hot snacks, but this only angered him even more. A colleague behind the glass approached, and now 2 people tried to calm him down. The chief steward then appeared to calm the situation, and the grandfather began waving a burnt sausage in his face. I was surprised he didn't hit him. I was extremely confused by the whole situation and wished I could have stayed home until the game started. Finally, after an hour, the kiosk opened. The guy at the checkout said, "You must be Mr. Alaganja," and calmly resolved the situation by dispensing a freshly baked sausage with the precision of a surgeon. Grandfather was completely satisfied with the result of his watch scandal. On the way back, he turned to me and said, "This is how these things should be handled." Story 2. I was 13 years old when this happened. My mom booked a hotel room for the trip, but when she got there, the hotel employees said there was an error with the reservation and the payment didn't go through. So she offered us a room with 2 beds at a discount. Instead of simply accepting the room, thanking the employee and leaving, my mother decided that the best way to solve the problem was to shout in the middle of the hotel lobby, "No one is going anywhere until I get my damn room!" She then continued to harass the employee, who clearly couldn't do anything about it until she called the police for disturbing the peace. It was terrible. Story 3. This is not my parent, but my grandmother. When I was about 10 years old, my grandmother went to McDonald's and bought food for us, her, my brother, and me. We returned home to find that there were no napkins in the bags. Not a problem, right? Our house is full of paper towels and napkins, and my brother and I are usually careful when we eat. But no. Grandma put us in the car, drove back to McDonald's, demanded the manager, and began to loudly complain that they didn't give us napkins. I wanted to sink into the ground in shame. "It's just napkins, Grandma." Story 4. When I was little, on a long-haul flight, my mom let my brother and I sleep on the floor. For safety reasons, the flight attendants told my mother that we could not sleep on the floor. She started arguing with them, and then the flight attendants turned to the pilots. The pilots threatened to turn the plane around if we didn't get off the floor, but she continued to argue. The pilots announced that they were going to turn the plane around because of my mother, and all the passengers began to be outraged. She finally gave in when all the passengers and crew on board the Boeing 747 united against her. Story 5. Previously, before Value Village, in the US at Savers, changed its policy, it would cut off price tags to get discounts because the cashiers would come up with the price on the spot. If they charged a high price, she would call the manager, and I really didn't like that. Story 6. I was on holiday with my parents, and the hotel mistakenly added extra money to the bill. My mom went to the front desk and demanded to see the manager. There was a long line, but she went straight ahead. The manager wasn't very helpful, probably because she was rude. My mom then turned to all the other customers in line and started saying that the hotel was a scam and that they were adding fake charges. She made a scene. The hotel called the police and we were escorted off the premises by real police officers. I felt terrible. Story 7. Oh, my father. He can be a real bore if his order is made incorrectly, be it fast food or a restaurant. He often yells at waiters if they undercook his steak. He insists that the steak be well done, otherwise he claims he has lost his appetite. One day when I was younger, we went to Burger King and sat down to eat. He took one bite of his burger, spat it out, and immediately began complaining that it was undercooked. He walked in front of everyone in line to yell at the cashier and then asked who was preparing the food. When the cook arrived, the father launched a burger, hitting the poor guy right in the face. He is now permanently banned from Burger King. Story 8. My mother demanded to see her cafe's hygiene certificate when she saw an employee go from slicing a cake in the kitchen to handling money at the till, when the real problem comes when the opposite happens. Story 9. My mom asked me to call her a taxi through the app. She called me several times complaining that the driver didn't take the route she thought was best. She's never owned a car and doesn't know how to drive, even though the driver was simply following the best route suggested by the GPS. As a result, she left halfway and changed to the subway. The driver called me in tears, completely shocked, not understanding what he had done wrong, and apologizing. I felt terrible. I never called her a taxi again. Story 10. I grew up in a small town that was just going through a period of rapid growth. We realized that our city was really developing when Olive Garden opened. We went there to eat too, 3 times a month. My mom and I always shared one dish, and my dad would order a separate one for himself. We knew the rule. If you share an entree and order more than one bowl of the family salad, there will be an additional $4 charge for the second person. It's fair. 2 dishes, 2 unlimited servings of salad. But one day, Dad decided he wanted more salad. Only he wanted extra salad. But the waitress said if she refilled the bowl, we would be charged an additional $4 fee. Well, my parents made a huge fuss because he was the only one who wanted extra salad. They demanded to see the manager, and the manager explained the rule, which we knew, but offered to cover the cost of the extra salad if only my parents would stop yelling. They agreed. When the bill came, the manager wrote off the cost of Dad's entree and the extra salad. My mom stood up, interrupted the manager while he was talking to other guests, threw the check in his face and asked, "What does that mean?" She was furious that the manager had written off the cost of Dad's meal. He ate the dish and she wanted to pay for it. She did not calm down until she was allowed to pay for the dish, but not for the salad. The manager was confused, but agreed. When the change came, the manager added some free snack coupons. My mother tore them and threw them on the floor as she left. It's safe to say that I haven't gone to a restaurant with them in at least a month, and I still refuse to go to Olive Garden with them. Story 11. I worked at Best Buy. I went there one day with my mom because she wanted to buy me a Star Wars DVD set for my birthday. I had a huge crush on the girl who worked at the customer service desk. Well, the price for the DVD set was $10 higher than stated, and my mom specifically didn't say anything until after the transaction was completed, so she could then claim $5 under the Michigan scanning law. My crush didn't know how to handle this request, and the manager was busy, so my mom started yelling at her, claiming that it was her job and she should understand how to do these things. At my work, to the girl I liked. My life was full of misery for some time after that. Story 12. My father simply loved to argue and get good deals. We were at a department store and I found a pair of pants that I was a little interested in. The pants had a $40 price tag on them, and on the counter there was a sign that said, "All pants are $1.25. I was a little curious and asked the seller if they had these pants in my size. The salesperson responded that these pants should not be on this rack. My father became furious and insisted that they sell him the pants for $25 and began demanding an additional discount. The matter reached the department manager and even the store manager. Meanwhile, I myself did not want these trousers. They were okay, but nothing special, and I wasn't that interested in them. I was quite content to just leave. I told my dad I didn't want the pants, but he didn't care anymore. He just wanted the pants at a lower price. After an hour of arguing, the store manager said, "We won't sell you these pants at this price. Take them for $40 or leave them." We left them, which was fine with me, because I didn't want those pants. Story 13. Not with me, but with my daughter-in-law. Her stepfather and mother took the family to dinner at Red Lobster. When they arrived, there were a lot of people there. The stepfather approached the hostess and said, "Yes, we have a reservation. The problem is that Red Lobster, at least this one, doesn't take reservations." The hostess explained this and said that the wait would be 20 minutes. The stepfather exploded and started screaming that he called 3 hours earlier and made a reservation. The hostess politely told him that this was not possible, as they do not accept reservations. Again, he continued to yell at the guy and demanded to speak to the manager. The manager came out and told him the same thing. They don't take reservations, so this is not possible. He continued to make a scene and people started leaving to escape this toxic situation. Finally, the manager said, "Okay, we'll put you ahead of everyone else who's patiently waiting their turn." He said, "Thank you." They were imprisoned. When they got to the table and the waitress left, he winked slyly and said to my brother and the rest of the family, "This is how things should be done." I wasn't going to wait 20 minutes. My brother refused to eat or order anything for fear that the food might have been spoiled. Story 14. There was an announcement in the store that if a product was sold at a price higher than the advertised price, it would be free. It was the 80s, and stores were doing weird things that I don't see today. Mom bought a box of Little Debbie cakes and they were listed for $2.85 instead of the advertised $2.50. Now, Mom wanted her free cakes. The cashier didn't know what to do and called the manager. The The manager said to push through the purchase and he will be right back. He came back and handed my mom 35 cents with a smile, saying, "Here you go." Mom pointed to the sign behind him and he said, "Oh, the last manager put that sign up. It doesn't make sense. I'm the new manager and I just haven't taken it down yet." It was a plastic sign attached to the wall. Mom insisted that they honor their announcement, but the manager refused. At this stage, as an adult, I fully supported my mother's actions. Mom packed her things, refused Little Debbie cakes on principle, and we got in the car. Mom went to the main store of this chain without a word, knowing that the office was nearby. We walked into this typical 80s wood-paneled office where Mom asked the secretary to talk to the store owner and was allowed since it was a family business, and their corporate office was smaller than the row of cubicles at my work. There, the mom went on a tirade about how she had lost trust in his brand and how his words meant nothing because they weren't living up to their ad. The person stood up, sincerely apologized, admitted she was right, and took a $5 bill out of his wallet, promising that he would talk to the manager, and the sign would either be respected or removed. We returned home to find that the ice cream we bought had melted in the trunk due to the summer heat and ruined the cereal and bread. Story 15. Maybe I'm a little late, but one day my father asked a Verizon wireless store employee to give him his own social security number because he asked for my father's number. The father ended up leaving the store with some stranger's social security number written on a sticky note. I silently watched what was happening because I really wanted to get my first phone. Story 16. My mother-in-law is truly the epitome of a Karen. Going to a restaurant with her always turns into a nightmare. She always has 14 special requirements for the order, and she does not show any kindness at all. But on the contrary, she behaves defensively from the very beginning, as if you had already ruined her order. No sauce, not near, none. Completely dry. Get it? I'll send it back. But the one experience I will never forget was dinner at Joe's Crab Shack. If you've never been there, it's one of those places where they periodically play a song, and the entire staff is required to stop working for a couple of minutes and do a synchronized dance. It's fast. Everyone loves it. It's part of the fun. My mother-in-law Karen knew about this. She had been here more than once. But apparently she didn't want to wait an extra 2 minutes for her dry salad, so she started making a fuss as soon as the dance started. She called the manager, who clearly knows Karen well, and offered a quick apology for doing their job, a discount, and her dry salad. But Karen was not completely satisfied. She told us that although she was paying for dinner for our party of 8, she would not tip the waitress a penny. She was loudly indignant throughout the rest of the dinner and found fault with the waitress over little things. I worked too many years in the service industry and, I'm just a decent person. I made sure my bill was separate so I could tip for the entire table. I wrote a short message on the receipt, something like, "Great job, despite a nasty customer." I was a little afraid of Karen's wrath. It was one of my first encounters with her. But when the waitress came and hugged me, Karen and I made eye contact. She understood. I did not care. Don't be like that, Karen. Story 17. My mom is a nightmare for service workers. Even though I, her daughter, work in the service industry and deal with people like her every day. Many incidents have stuck with me, but one in particular confused me greatly. We were at Walmart. The store worker was trying to cope with the task and dropped her scanner on the floor. I was about to help her pack her things when my mom screamed like a hurricane, "You know you should pick it up! People may slip!" and immediately rushed off with the cart. I was so embarrassed that I just walked away in shame. When I explained to my mom that the girl accidentally dropped the scanner, she said, "Well, she should be more careful." Story 18. About once a month, my father gets drunk and calls various customer service centers with demands. When he finally ends the call, often taking more than 45 minutes, he spends the next few days telling us how he slayed the customer service dragon and how no one values their customers these days, and so on. Okay, Dad, you're being a jerk. No one appreciates that. If you've been a DirecTV customer support guy since 1996, I apologize on behalf of my dad. Another story for you. McDonald's once had a 2-for-1 breakfast promotion where the total cost was about $3. He got his breakfast, drove about 25 minutes to work, realized he didn't get one of his sandwiches, and then called McDonald's customer service every night after work for a week to complain about wasting $1.50. They apologized to him, they gave him coupons, but he just wanted to scream. Story 19. Not exactly on topic, but my dad was great at working with clients like this. We had a family business selling and installing fireplaces. For context, on more than one occasion, he received calls or personal visits from customers after the installers had finished work and left, complaining that one of the workers was rude or something similar. The father made a serious expression, showing deep concern. He would then begin to tell the story, saying something like, "Oh no, not again," or inhaling with his mouth open and jaw clenched, accompanied by clicking his tongue, and then start talking some nonsense about how he had already warned the employee for the last time, and now he will have to be fired. The sight of blood draining from people's faces or the dead silence on the other end of the phone line was magical. Then clients would frantically explain that maybe it's not so bad or even blame themselves. He never intended to fire anyone, but in this way, he quickly found out who was just complaining for fun. Many of these clients are not shy about causing problems for workers, but in general, people don't want to jeopardize someone's job. Story 20. When I was 6 years old, my mom took my brothers and I to dinner at the Golden Corral. She went to the buffet, took the steak, and returned to the table. Mom was an avid fan of A1 sauce and couldn't, I repeat couldn't, eat a steak without it. She poured the A1 sauce onto her plate, tasted it, and was instantly horrified. She then poured the Golden Corral steak sauce next to A1, and they were identical. Furious, she called the waitress and then the manager, showing them her little experiment and how she had uncovered the great sauce fraud of 2006. My brothers and I were traumatized for the rest of our lives. I still have nightmares about it. Story 21. So my mom and I went shopping and she dropped a melon on the way out. She stated that the melon was broken and demanded a full refund. When she was refused, she started yelling at the customer service representative and demanded to see a manager. I sat next to him with a, "I want to fall into the ground" expression on my face. After that, one of the customer service people gave me a chocolate bar, and 7-year-old me was happy. Story 22. Not a child, but I think it will do. I had a terrible, annoying, and simply unbearable neighbor, whom I, being too kind, treated in a friendly way. She asked me to go to dinner with her because it was her birthday, and I knew I was the only one who would agree to go with her. And so we went, taking the children with us. She has 2 daughters. I have 1. She made her eldest do math work right at the table. When the child asked for help, it was 3rd grade math. The mother said it was too difficult. In the end, I helped her. The waiter was quite normal. He came over to take our orders. The neighbor had already started acting strange, but she always behaved this way, so I didn't attach any importance to it. The waiter came over again and asked if we needed anything. She waved him off and said that nothing was needed. After 30 seconds, she turns to me and says, "Can you believe how terrible this waiter is? He doesn't even refill my drink," and starts listing all these problems that didn't actually exist. I say, "He just asked if he needed anything." She interrupts me. "I'm going to talk to the manager." Oh my. She talks to the manager as if this is the worst experience of her life. I'm shocked. Her children lowered their heads. My daughter doesn't notice anything. Laughs. The manager gives her a discount of half the price of dinner. And the icing on the cake? "This is my half, so you only have to pay the rest." Oh, thank you very much. I left a big tip and a note on the check saying the waiter was great and apologizing for the unfounded complaints. This was the second most awkward restaurant experience of my life. Story 23. One day, I was in a music store with my father. He bought the record for 19.99 euros. He paid with a 20-euro note. The cashier took the money, put it in the register, and gave my father, and I started to leave. As I turned around, I heard her say to the cashier, "You." The cashier replied that they. My father said that this was legally impossible and asked to see the manager. To cut the story short, one of the cashiers gave my father a cent from his own wallet. Story 24. I don't like going to restaurants with her. She thinks that because she worked as a waitress a year 35 years ago, this gives her the right to act like a complete rude person with the current waiters. She also believes that not leaving a tip is a way to get them to come to their senses. It's funny, Mom, but I always find our waiter after we're seated, give him $20, and apologize in advance for your behavior. P.S. Yes, she knows what I think about it. She does not care. She believes that she is sticking to her principles and that tipping for bad service, Rad never had good service, there is always something wrong, only encourages their laziness. This won't change. If you're serving her, I'm so sorry. PPPS. She worked as a waitress at Pizza Hut when she was 20. She looks at that time through rose-colored glasses. I worked hard, tried my best to get a tip, and then she yells at the waitress for trying to top up her drink. "Sorry, did I ask for more?" Obviously, logic and empathy are not her strong suits. Story 25. My grandmother was not only a typical call the manager, but also a racist, and her advancing dementia had completely turned off her filter for such remarks. I blocked out all the details of the incident in my memory, except that I took her to buy yarn, and something went wrong. It seems they shortchanged her by a couple of dollars or refused to accept the coupon. Anyway, it ended with call the manager and a tirade about not hiring Mexicans. I just remember trying to shout over her, saying, "Oh my God, you can't talk to her like that. Nothing you said is acceptable." And then tried to wheel her out of the store as quickly as possible, while she dug in to stop herself from continuing to ruin someone's day. I wondered if I'd end up in jail for elder abuse if her ankles broke in the process, because nothing could stop me from taking her out of the store. I put her in the car and came back to apologize until I was blue in the face from stress. I would like to say that this was an isolated incident, but alas, it was not so. If by some cosmic accident any of the salespeople or operators who dealt with my grandmother read this message, I sincerely apologize on behalf of our entire family and would hug you if I could. An interesting side effect of caring for her is that I have a tendency to walk away and pretend I'm looking at something when we get to the checkout line if I'm not the one paying. I think she honestly gave me a phobia. P.S. Thanks for the helpful tips on pushing the wheelchair backwards next time. She passed away 2 years ago, so luckily I won't have to deal with this anymore. I've never had someone dig in their heels and panicked trying to get her out of the store before she did anything else. I think under any other circumstances I would have figured it out. PPS side story. This luckily happened at home, but looking back, it was both funny and terrible. It was a special occasion, probably someone's birthday, because we were all sitting around the kitchen table eating cake. In the evenings, we would sit down to dinner, and Grandma would turn on the TV to watch the evening news, which we listened to with half an ear. They were talking about something political, and they said, blah, 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 and the House Judiciary Committee approved it. Grandma caught this phrase and said, "Legal committee! Damn Jews! What are they doing with all these committees?" I was caught between wanting to laugh at her misunderstanding and wanting to express horror, and instead I just took a sharp breath and choked on a huge piece of chocolate cake, coughing so hard and for so long that my mom ended up taking me to the ER because it triggered an asthma attack. Good times, friends. Good times. Story 26. Not with me, but an incident I observed. Several years ago, I was in a cell phone store. This was at a time when phones were just starting to become water resistant. One boy had apparently been swimming with his phone all day, and the screen had changed color slightly, and the touchscreen had stopped working properly. The boy clearly understood that he had messed up and constantly asked his mother to leave, saying that the phone was still working and he could get by. Mom didn't even try to be polite. She walked into the store and immediately began acting like an aggressive customer. I remember her grinning and saying, "Oh, you're going to hate me. You better call the manager right away." Story 27. When I was little, my mom and stepfather took us to McDonald's. Somehow a nail or something got stuck in the tire, causing it to go flat. I'm not sure if it happened in the parking lot, but they were sure it did. They went to talk to the manager. I don't remember exactly what they demanded, but they didn't get it. They literally went outside and waved their arms, scaring people away and saying the restaurant was closed because they were angry. This seemed like an incredibly overreaction. Story 28. When we were younger, we traveled often and skipped lines at the airport since we were kids. But now that we were teenagers, my mother pretended to have heart problems to skip the long line to board the plane. The flight attendant did not budge and told us to go back to the end of the line. I still remember the smiles and looks of everyone who stood there. Story 29. My mom has been like this regularly throughout my life, but I have one positive story about it. When I was a teenager, she and I went to eat at Portillos and sat in the back of the restaurant, where it was more private to eat in peace. About 10 minutes into our meal, 2 people walked into the empty area and sat down 2 tables away from us. It turned out that it was the manager and the employee he was telling off. The manager behaved like a real rude person, criticized and humiliated the employee. My mom put her food down and walked up to them and started yelling at the manager for being rude. She went on a tirade about how rude and wrong it was to do this in front of customers 2 tables away and gave him a good scolding. She demanded his boss's phone number and we left after she got it. I was quite ashamed at the time, but as I grew older, I realized that she stood up for that employee and that the manager was indeed in the wrong. I'm not sure what she did with that number because I lived with my father, and after that meal I returned home to him. Story 30. My mother used to run restaurants. My stepfather worked as a chef in high-end restaurants and always expected to be treated better than he was, no matter what kind of service he received. It's not very pleasant to go to a restaurant with them. Most embarrassing experience is actually their most embarrassing moment when I humiliated them. My wife and I pride ourselves on being the relief table when we go out to eat. Both of us worked as waiters, and there is always the opposite of difficult tables. That's us. Unless it's terrible service or bad food, we're very easy customers, tip generously, and try to have a good time with our waiter. Moreover, we simply treat people politely. So you can imagine our outrage when my parents act like they're kings at dinner. We went to have dinner with them. They were especially demanding. My mom acted like Gordon Ramsay, analyzing the business, criticizing everything down to the number of bubbles in her soda. Looks like it's time to change the CO2. My stepdad was getting increasingly irritated about stupid things like the amount of ice in his drink and the waitress not pouring him water, which he hardly drank quickly enough. The highlight was that my stepfather ordered a steak medium. Well, it came medium well, but for some reason he changed his mind and wanted it medium rare while it was cooking. And the waitress couldn't guess what he was thinking, so he started to get upset, like my mom. They quickly moved on to demand free compensation. I was an adult, and this was probably the first time they realized it. I intervened in front of the waitress and said something like, "Really? Are you serious? That's what you do. You ordered." I turned to the waitress and said, "We don't need to compensate anything." Then he took out his wallet, gave her my card, and said, "It's on the bill. We'll be happy to finish with what we have." I apologize for their behavior. You've done well. Then I said the phrase that hit them so hard and which they still remember. I was taught to be polite, a lesson that seems to have been forgotten. Thank you. They turned red, the waitress walked away. I looked down and started cutting the steak without saying a word. Dinner was almost silent except for me asking my stepdad how he liked his steak a few minutes later. I paid the check, left a big tip, and we left, saying goodbye. From then on, they became more polite to the waiters every time we went out together. Story 31. My mom had to return some shirts at the mall because they didn't fit. The time allotted for the return had already expired, so the employee said that she could not help. My mom started yelling at this girl who was probably about 16 or 17 years old, calling her names and demanding to talk to the manager. When the manager told my mom that there was nothing they could do and that the return policy was on the receipt, my mom went berserk, knocked over the display case that was next to the cash register, and ran out of the store. I was probably 6 or 7 years old at the time, and I was shocked. I apologized for her behavior and gathered everything I could until she started calling me to follow her. The manager was very nice to me and told me that I was a good kid and should stand up for my mom when I got away with it. Story 32. It's a strange story that had a huge impact on me, and it's about a parent talking to a manager, but a little different. When I was growing up, my father was the sheriff of a small town. I was probably about 8, 9 years old. He was appointed after the previous sheriff was ousted for political reasons, for stealing city funds. It was a very unpopular movie because he was very popular and was throwing his money around the city and getting people away with murder. The sheriff was removed and my father was taken in his place. Everyone hated him, partly because they loved the old sheriff and also because my father was an outsider, although he came from 2 cities. He was not from their world, so he could never be fit to rule the village. It didn't help that my dad was a raging asshole with a stick up his ass to enforce rules. One day, my father, dressed in full uniform, took me alone to the local corner diner, like one of those places that comes straight out of Roadhouse. We sat down at the table, ate a full meal, and my father lectured me about respect and rules are all we have. Then the waitress came and brought the check. Dad looked at it and it said dinner was free. Then the father apologized and approached the waitress. I was left alone, drawing on a napkin, and when I looked up, my father was already screaming at the woman with all his might. He was actually shaking. She tried to explain that free food was how all police officers in this city were treated, and my father was furious that he would get special treatment, that the police were above ordinary laws, that the police have rules they must follow and not accepting kickbacks is one of those rules, and that this especially happened in front of his child, whom he is trying to teach the right behavior. Everyone in the diner went quiet and just looked at him. It was a strange situation because it was a moment where my father showed great honesty, but at the same time it was a story about a 6'10" man with a gun on his belt yelling at a tiny waitress. This story is imprinted in my head as a visual representation of the contradictions of our parents. A lot of good comes from them, but at the same time a lot of bad. Edit. This blew up more than I expected, so I'd like to advance. Not being an asshole cop who hits his kids. Edit. Stop sending messages about what a piece of shit my dad was. He's no hero and has done some really shitty things in his life, but I'm still his son, and it's not fun to hear from a bunch of strangers how much my dad sucks. You didn't know him, you don't know his whole story, you just know a piece of life told by one person. The point of this story is that people are complex and that we are full of contradictions, not to give ourselves another reason to be outraged on the internet. He was the guy who beat me and my brother, had anger issues, was painfully insecure and withdrawn, but also a noteworthy cop. He rose through the ranks and, as a white man, brought progressive racial policies to his department in the 1980s that remain radical to this day. He was an innovator as a police administrator. I will say this. He did heartbreaking things for me, and yet I found the strength to forgive him. After going through a long and painful process, I found the opportunity to forgive him as an adult. I don't condone his behavior, but I have peace in my heart regarding my feelings for him. Whatever your opinion about it, keep in mind that judging by your computer, this is very easy for you, but for me it has always been and will be very difficult. Story 33. My father would sometimes do this in restaurants if the server was too slow or the food was wrong, especially multiple times in one meal. He was absolutely right to be upset because sometimes it got to the extreme, but we all hated it. The worst was when we were at our favorite restaurant. My mom literally said, "I won't do that." And she gathered us 3 children, and we went to the car. Edit. Looks like you got the wrong impression. My father was not an asshole to anyone, and at worst he did this several times a year. The incidents I remember warranted his conversation with the manager, and he was never rude or abusive. The rest just didn't care enough about the poor service to say anything to anyone. Story 34. We were once scammed at Taco Bell in an unusual way, and my mom was completely upset. The people running the place ran out of lettuce, and I have never encountered more stupid people. Instead of just telling people they were finished and leaving it at that, they acted like idiots and said, "There will be a slight delay." It was a very hot day. The air conditioning was broken. We were tired. That's it. What we really want is some water, but we're stuck in line, waiting and waiting while they try to figure out how to make salad out of thin air. You'd think there was another package somewhere or something, but maybe it was too complicated for them. And so, 20 minutes of sitting while preparing food in a car, sandwiched between other cars in the driveway, and not having the opportunity to drive forward, backward, or even to the side. Speakers and signs, even if we wanted to jump over the curb. And my mom just swears until she's blue in the face at the stupidity of the people involved in this, screaming, "God damn it. Just make the fucking tacos without the salad, stupid assholes that you use for brains. The puny remains of your blown-up asses." I remember a lot of, this is very striking because I was about 12 or 13 at the time, and I was learning all sorts of new words and phrases. My little brother took notes. At this point, we see some idiot teenage Taco Bell employee break out of the building and run across the parking lot to the grocery store across the street. They sent this idiot out to buy some salad. The swearing goes up several notches. "No one care about this fucking salad. Jesus, damn Christ, let us out of here, you little," etc. and so on. Volume, diversity, depravity. Mom hits all the good spots. 45 minutes or so after we got into this, there's a car at the window, the couple ahead of us. That is probably the real villain of the story. Why don't they fucking leave without the salad? WTF? Finally get something. And they don't leave right away. They have to fucking talk for a while before they leave. My mom is an expired volcano and is just foaming at the mouth. But eventually, they pull away and leave and we can drive up to the window. What I left out of this story. My family participated in parades as clowns for several years, handing out candy to children on the side of the road and dancing along the parade route to the rousing tune of "Celebrate Good Time Tonight" on repeat. And this day was one of those days. We were all in full costume, makeup, super baggy rainbow pants, rainbow wig, big flower on the suspenders, huge ridiculous boots, the whole thing. Finally, the car pulls away from us, and my mother, who for the last hour has been a bulldog, spewing bile and vindictive rage, and constantly criticizing the origins and upbringing of the people at the window, understands that she would have to stop and appear before them in full clown regalia to get our stupid tacos. I remember the moment when my mother realized this. A mixture of anger, embarrassment, absurdity, and ultimately, the humor of the whole situation rushed through her, and she began to laugh so hard that she burst into tears. And when the people behind us started honking at us to just leave, they were waiting too. It became even funnier. So now Mom isn't just a crazy angry lady. She's a crazy angry clown lady, and what's more, she's a crazy clown lady who's sweating and now crying too. So she's no longer even a crazy clown with good makeup, but just a wreck of a crazy clown, which makes her laugh even harder. My brother and I thought she was going to die. She couldn't breathe. And these outfits, the heat, damn it. We only came here because we needed water. We must give Mom credit. She didn't just jump out of there screaming, not caring about anyone. She took control of herself in my hands, drove up to the window, looked at the girl through the car window with ruined clown makeup and a large rainbow wig, very calmly handed her the money, said thank you, took the bag, and we drove off. I hope they remember us. I know I'll never forget the look on the girl's face when we pulled up and she started apologizing for the delay and just stopped, stared at us. Story 35. When I was about 6 or 7, we drove all day through Florida to visit my grandmother. Due to various travel problems, we arrived at the hotel at 3 in the morning, to find that there were no pillows in our room. My dad took my mom and me downstairs and asked the concierge what he was going to do about it. He replied that he didn't know what to do because all the extra pillows were for guests. He asked, "What if someone needs them?" Then my father exploded, pointing out that exactly this situation was happening at that moment, and began to attack this guy. It was the first time I heard my father swear. Story 36. Not long ago, my mom asked me to treat my wife and I to lunch at the Outback Steakhouse. We got there and made an order. Mom orders iced tea with lemon. Tea is brought with 1 lemon. Usually no big deal, right? Just ask to add. But instead of doing this, Mom turns to the waiter and says, "What? No extra lemon? You failed as a waiter. No points for you." The dude sits like that for a minute and then says quite categorically, "I'll be right back and bring more lemon." I turn to my mom and say, "That's how you get spit in your food. You just made it clear that this is going to be a crap tipping table and he's going to focus on other things." She retorts, "Well, that should have inspired him to work harder to impress us." I think from this point of view, I just mentioned that on his end, the chances of making money are now higher at the other table. That's how people are made. Well, she goes to the bathroom and cries. He comes back and makes some super complicated order. I texted my wife, who was sitting next to me. This dude is going to mess up the order on purpose. They bring food. Ours is correct, ideal, and hers? Everything is ruined. In general, a completely wrong order. She asks to fix it, a little more subdued this time. Everything comes out technically correct, but clearly carelessly prepared. I chuckle internally. Here's the craziest part. After all this, she turns to us and says, "I was right about that waiter. He sucks at his job." Like, no, dude. Your behavior made him not care about you. After being a complete ass and paying for it, she walked away feeling confident and arrogant. I left her a good tip with a note saying, "Sorry about my mom." Story 37. I was having breakfast with my mom and our waitress immediately disappeared. We sat there for a good 30 minutes without ordering anything other than scrambled eggs. It was after hours, so the diner was pretty quiet. It seemed like our waitress just disappeared. Naturally, Mom asked someone if we could talk to the manager. She came in, Mom told her what happened, and asked if she could check on our waitress, our food, etc. 10 minutes later, the manager shows up with our food and waitress in tow. She put our food down and then proceeded to tear the waitress apart. The poor woman burst into tears, apologizing. We felt terrible and didn't even bother to finish our food. Once the manager was out of sight, my mom found the waitress, hugged her, and gave her a larger tip than usual. It was rude and left us both quite embarrassed. Story 38. So we were on our way to an amusement park in the nation's capital. I was probably about 19, my sister was 16, and my youngest was 9. My dad had been planning this trip for a year, and we were on edge. When you enter this place, you see a huge lake, and on each side, there are several shops. There's a restaurant there. There's a souvenir shop. There's also a Build-A-Bear store there. This store is not part of the park itself, but it does have an entrance from the park. Be that as it may, my father did not have custody of my sister at that time and saw her only occasionally. It was his own choice because his anxiety meant he couldn't care for her properly. She lived with a foster family. It was one of 3 times a year that he was able to take her somewhere, so this trip was very important. He told her that she could only take one thing from the park, and he would pay for anything she wanted. And as a 9-year-old girl, she said she wanted Build-A-Bear. My dad wasn't familiar with the Build-A-Bear concept, so he didn't know that the price of the bear wasn't the whole cost. It comes with clothes, shoes, etc. So the store employee walked my sister through it all. You know, stuffing, inserting a heart and so on, and names the total amount. My father completely lost his head. It's like a redhead screaming at that poor girl in the store. And I was so ashamed. First of all, this girl didn't know the prices. Secondly, it was the best trip of the year. There were 4 of us for the first time in our entire lives. And thirdly, you can't shout at people like that. I understand that he was angry because he did not know the process and felt cheated. He also felt cornered because he had promised my sister that she could have everything. But you can't do that, never. Luckily, the rest of the trip went smoothly, and my little sister doesn't remember this ever happening. She now has 2 Build-A-Bears, and she named each of them after one of her sisters.